My name is Maribel Cross, and the night my parents told me they were leaving everything to my brother, they smiled like they were doing me a favor. You never needed our help anyway, my mother said. So I smiled back. I nodded. I said, "You're right." What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had been paying their mortgage for 12 years, quietly, automatically, like a reflex. And that night, when they erased me from their future, I stopped. 90 days later, a foreclosure notice arrived. My father called, shaking. "Why didn't you tell us?" I hung up. If you've ever been sidelined, erased, or used by the people who raised you, tell me in the comments. Share this story. And stay with me until the end, because what happened next shattered everything they thought they owned. I learned early that love in my family had a hierarchy. It wasn't written down. No one announced it. But it lived in tone, in timing, in who got rescued and who was expected to stand on their own 2 feet without wobbling. My brother Lucas was the miracle, the risk taker, the one who needed support. Every stumble he made was treated like a temporary setback, something the family would rally around until he found his footing again. When he failed, they called it potential. When he struggled, they called it pressure. When I succeeded, they called it independence. "You're strong, Maribel," my father would say, the words landing like a door closing. "You'll be fine," my mother added, already turning away. Strong meant invisible. Fine meant unattended. I didn't rebel. I didn't act out. I didn't ask why my report cards were skimmed while Lucas's were framed. I didn't ask why my college acceptance letter was met with a nod, while his business idea, half-baked and unfunded, got a celebratory dinner. I internalized the rules instead. I adapted. By 16, I had a job. By 18, I had two. By 22, I paid my own rent, my own insurance, my own emergencies. When something broke in my life, I fixed it quietly. When something broke in theirs, they called a family meeting. They said I never needed help. That was the story they told themselves. The truth was simpler. I learned not to ask because asking never worked. The house was the center of everything. The family home. The symbol. My parents talked about it the way people talk about inheritance before anyone is dead. It was their proof of stability, their anchor, their legacy. They loved that house fiercely, irrationally, like it was another child. When the cracks started, they hid them. I found out by accident. A folded envelope on the kitchen counter, red ink peeking through white paper. I wasn't snooping. I was grabbing a glass of water. But the words, "past due," have a way of screaming even when you're not listening. I didn't say anything at first. I watched my parents move through the kitchen with forced lightness. My mother humming too loudly, my father avoiding my eyes. That night, after dinner, my mother lingered at the sink. "Maribel," she said casually, "you're good with finances." It was never, "Can you help us?" It was always, "You're good at this." My father cleared his throat. "Just a short-term thing. We had a delay. Temporary." They didn't look ashamed. They looked inconvenienced. I remember the exact number, the exact date. I remember opening my banking app and hesitating, not because I couldn't afford it, but because some part of me understood that once I did this, it wouldn't end cleanly. I transferred the money anyway. "Just this once," my mother said, relief flooding her face. "We'll fix it next month." Next month came, then another, then another. No one asked again. They didn't have to. The expectations settled in like dust. I paid. Quietly. Automatically. I told myself it was temporary. That family helped family. That it would stop once things stabilized. Things never stabilized. Lucas moved in and out of the house like it was a hotel with emotional room service. He borrowed. He delayed. He promised. My parents covered for him with words. I covered for them with money. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends. Not partners. It felt private. Embarrassing even. Like admitting I'd volunteered to disappear. Years passed without ceremony. The payments became routine, just another line item in my life. My parents never said thank you. Not once. They spoke about the mortgage as if it paid itself, as if the house simply existed by divine right. Sometimes my mother would complain about money, about stress, about how hard everything was. I would nod, already knowing the numbers she pretended not to see. And still, they told people I never needed help. That was the lie that held everything together. The night they invited me over to talk about the future, I didn't suspect anything. I thought it was about downsizing, or paperwork, or one of Lucas's emergencies. I didn't know I was walking into my own erasure, but I smiled anyway, because that's what the strong daughter does. The second payment was the moment I understood the truth, even if I refused to name it yet. The first time, there had been urgency. Voices lowered, doors closed. My mother's hand shook when she slid the paper across the table. My father spoke in clipped sentences, like he was holding something back. It had felt like a crisis, temporary, containable. The second time came wrapped in normalcy. No meeting, no envelope, just a casual comment over coffee. "The bank's been annoying again," my father said, irritation edging his voice. "Probably a system thing." My mother didn't look at me when she added, "You don't mind covering it again, right? Just until we straighten things out." Not can you? Not please. Just assumption. I remember staring at the steam rising from my mug, watching it curl and vanish, thinking about how easy it would be to say no. I had rent due, deadlines, a life that required my full attention, but years of conditioning kicked in before my logic could catch up. "Sure," I said. "Send me the amount." Relief moved through the room like oxygen. Conversation resumed. The moment passed. That was when the payment stopped being help and became expectation. I started tracking it in a separate spreadsheet, not because they asked me to, but because I needed to see it. I needed proof that this wasn't in my head. Month after month, the numbers lined up like a quiet accusation. I told myself I'd show them one day, laugh about it, turn it into a story we'd all acknowledge. That day never came. Instead, the requests thinned out, then disappeared entirely. The mortgage draft was set to auto. The bank had my information. My parents stopped mentioning it, the way people stop mentioning a problem once someone else has taken ownership of it. When I asked, once, whether things were getting better, my father waved a hand. "It's under control." Under my control, apparently. Lucas knew nothing, or pretended not to. It was hard to tell with him. He had a talent for selective blindness. He would complain about the house like he contributed to it, about repairs, about taxes, about how expensive it was to maintain. My mother would nod sympathetically. I would swallow my words. At holidays, they hosted lavish dinners. At birthdays, they gave generous gifts. I watched my money turn into decorations, renovations, comfort. The house glowed brighter every year, polished and proud, while I learned to live with less without ever saying why. There were moments, small, cutting ones, that should have stopped me. Like the afternoon my mother sighed dramatically and said, "We've sacrificed so much for you kids." Or the night my father joked, "At least we never asked you for anything." I laughed with them. My throat burned every time. I didn't stop because part of me believed this was what loyalty looked like, and part of me feared what would happen if I withdrew. Not foreclosure, not consequences, something worse. Acknowledgement. If I stopped paying, they would have to notice me. And I wasn't sure they knew how. Years stacked on top of each other. Promotions passed. Relationships ended. Every financial decision I made carried an invisible qualifier. After the mortgage, I missed trips. I delayed plans. I said no without explaining. The house became a silent partner in my life, one that never spoke, never thanked me, never existed publicly, but demanded consistency. My parents aged into comfort. Their stress lines softened, their voices steadied. They spoke about retirement with confidence, about leaving something behind. They started using words like inheritance. The first time my mother said it, my stomach tightened. Well, of course the house will go to Lucas, she said lightly, like it was obvious. He'll need stability. I waited. I waited for her to remember me, to glance my way, to add something. Anything. She didn't. I realized then that in their story, I wasn't the provider. I was the background condition that made their reality possible, like electricity, like plumbing, essential, unseen, taken for granted. The first payment had been framed as help. The second made it habit. Everything after that erased me entirely. And by the time they invited me to sit down and discuss what comes next, I had already been written out, financially invisible, emotionally expendable, and still paying for a house they believed was entirely theirs. 12 years is a long time to keep a secret that owns you. It doesn't announce itself all at once. It creeps in through decisions that seem reasonable on their own. You tell yourself you'll stop next year. After this promotion, after things calm down, after the house is safer. There's always a reason. Always a future version of yourself who will be stronger, braver, more selfish. I wasn't that version yet. The mortgage shaped my life without ever touching it. Every opportunity passed through a quiet filter. Can I still make the payment? When friends talked about moving, traveling, investing, I smiled and redirected. When relationships edged toward seriousness, I kept things vague. It was easier to be seen as independent than to explain the truth. That part of my life belonged to a house I didn't live in. My parents marked time with milestones, anniversaries, renovations, holidays that got bigger every year. I marked time by bank notifications, paid, processed, confirmed. Lucas drifted in and out of the house like gravity didn't apply to him. He stayed when it suited him, left when it didn't. He borrowed my parents' car, their patience, their future. They never asked him for stability. They asked him how he felt. One Thanksgiving, he raised a glass and joked, "Here's to Mom and Dad for keeping the lights on." Everyone laughed. I felt something snap inside me then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean break. A realization that whatever this was, it would never be acknowledged unless it became a problem. My mother developed a habit of complaining to me in private about money, about stress, about how hard it was to manage everything. She spoke to me like a confidant, not a daughter. "You're lucky," she said once. "You don't have anyone depending on you." I looked at her, standing in the kitchen I paid for, and wondered how a person could be so close to the truth and still miss it entirely. I tried once, just once, to test the waters. "You know I've been helping out a lot," I said carefully. "With the house." My father frowned. "Helping how?" The question stopped me cold. I realized then that to them, help only counted if it came from someone who needed recognition for it. My silence had rewritten history. I dropped it. From that point on, something in me hardened. I stopped hoping for acknowledgement, stopped expecting fairness. I paid because I had already paid, because stopping felt disruptive, because I told myself I could endure anything as long as I stayed quiet. That's the lie endurance sells you. That silence is strength. At year 8, I started counting backward. How much longer until it was paid off? How much of my life would it cost? I fantasized about the final payment, the freedom, the reveal. The moment I'd sit them down and say, "You're welcome." But time didn't work that way. Interest compounded. Repairs came up. The finish line moved. At year 10, my mother began talking openly about legacy. "This house will stay in the family," she said proudly. "We built something solid." Built. The word tasted bitter. They invited me over more often then, asked my opinion on decor, on paperwork, on things that required competence but not credit. I gave it freely. It was what I was trained to do. The meeting invite came in the most unremarkable way possible. A text from my mother. We should all sit down soon and talk about the future. No urgency, no emotion, just administration. I didn't connect it to the house at first. I thought maybe they were downsizing, or updating wills, or dealing with one of Lucas's endless pivots. I couldn't imagine, that after 12 years of quiet sacrifice, they would look me in the eye and tell me I was entitled to nothing. But the night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar hum of responsibility. Somewhere in my mind, a door I'd kept closed for years creaked open. What if they never knew? What if they never cared? The question settled heavy in my chest. Not fear, not anger, clarity. By the time I walked into their living room the next evening, I wasn't nervous. I was empty. And emptiness, I would soon learn, is a dangerous place to stand when people expect you to keep giving without ever asking why. The room was arranged like something official was about to happen. Chairs pulled closer together. Papers stacked neatly on the coffee table. My mother had lit a candle she only used when guests came over, even though it was just family. Especially because it was just family. Lucas was already there, stretched comfortably across the couch, scrolling on his phone. He didn't look nervous. He looked entitled to the outcome, whatever it was. My father cleared his throat the way he did when he wanted attention without asking for it. We wanted to talk while everyone's here, he said. About the future. My mother nodded, hands folded tightly in her lap. She wouldn't look at me yet. I sat down slowly, crossing my legs, smoothing my hands over my knees. I felt strangely calm, detached, like I'd arrived late to a conversation that had already decided its ending. This isn't anything bad, my mother said quickly. We just think it's important to be clear. Clear. That word should have warned me. My father slid a folder toward the center of the table, thick, heavy, the kind of thing that carries finality in its spine. We've been doing some planning, he continued. Estate stuff, practical things. Lucas finally looked up. We've decided, my mother said, her voice firm now, rehearsed, that the house will go to Lucas. She said it the way people announce weather. No drama, no hesitation. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was complete. I waited for the second sentence, the explanation, the acknowledgement, the part where my name entered the conversation. It didn't come. Instead, my father added, "You've always been independent, Maribel. You never needed our help." My mother smiled at me then. Actually smiled, like she was proud of herself. "You're right," she said. "You've done so well on your own." Something inside me stilled. Not broke, not shattered. Just stopped. Lucas shifted, clearing his throat. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. No protest, no confusion. He accepted it like a delivery he'd been expecting. I felt every one of the 12 years settle into my body at once. Every payment, every sacrifice, every swallowed word. They lined up behind my ribs like witnesses no one would call. My mother reached for my hand, a gesture that felt performative. "This doesn't change anything," she said. "We love you both equally." Equally. The word landed wrong, like a mistranslation. I looked down at her hand on mine, thought about how many times those hands had accepted my money without ever asking where it came from. In that moment, something remarkable happened. I smiled. Not the tight, polite smile I'd perfected over the years. A real one. Slow. Deliberate. "You're right," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I never needed your help." My father exhaled, visibly relieved, like he'd been bracing for resistance and was grateful not to have to deal with it. "I knew you'd understand," he said. Understand? They mistook my silence for agreement, my calm for acceptance, my smile for permission. Lucas relaxed fully then, leaning back, confidence settling into his posture. The conversation drifted into logistics, timelines, documents, practicalities that all assumed my absence. No one asked if I had questions. No one asked how I felt. No one asked if there was anything I wanted to say, because in their minds, I had already been accounted for. The daughter who never needed help, who would be fine, who would adapt. The candle flickered on the table, its flame steady. I watched it, grounding myself in the absurd normalcy of the moment. The house smelled like coffee and wax and certainty. I stood up before anyone could stop me. Well, I said lightly, I should get going. Mother looked surprised. Already? I have an early morning, I replied. True, in a way. They walked me to the door. My father hugged me, brief and distracted. My mother kissed my cheek. Thank you for being so understanding, she whispered. I didn't correct her. As I stepped outside, the night air felt sharp against my skin. Clear. Bracing. I sat in my car for a long moment without turning the engine on. My phone buzzed with a familiar notification. Mortgage payment scheduled. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't confirm it. I drove away smiling, knowing something they couldn't yet imagine had already begun. Stopping wasn't dramatic. That's the part people never understand. There was no announcement, no speech, no warning shot fired into the air. I didn't sit anyone down. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't explain. I simply didn't press confirm. The due date passed quietly, like a held breath. Nothing happened that day. No alarms. No calls. The world didn't tilt on its axis. The house didn't crumble. The silence almost felt anticlimactic. I went to work. I answered emails. I ate dinner. I slept better than I had in years. The first notice arrived 2 weeks later. An email from the bank, polite and procedural. We noticed a missed payment. I read it once, then archived it. I didn't forward it. Didn't screenshot it. Didn't feel the need to document anything anymore. 30 days in, the tone changed. This one came by mail. Thick paper. Firm language. Late fees outlined neatly at the bottom, like a bill for consequences. I held it in my hands and felt something close to relief. Proof that the system worked even when I stepped out of it. My parents didn't call. I wondered if they hadn't noticed yet, or if they assumed I'd fix it like I always did. Probably the second. Habits have inertia. People lean into what's always saved them. At 45 days, the bank called my phone. Hello, this is regarding a delinquent account. I'm not the homeowner, I said calmly and hung up. That was the moment it became irreversible. 60 days brought urgency. Certified letters, bold text, language designed to frighten people into action. I lined them up on my kitchen counter like evidence in a case I no longer intended to argue. Still, nothing from my parents. Lucas posted pictures online, new clothes, nights out, a caption about finally feeling settled. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, then closed the app. His confidence was built on an assumption that hadn't yet collapsed. At 75 days, my mother called, but not about the house. Can you believe how expensive groceries are? She complained. Everything's just ridiculous lately. I let her talk. I made the right noises. I didn't interrupt. The absurdity of it sat between us, unspoken. 90 days arrived on a Tuesday. The foreclosure notice came by courier. Signature. Required. I remember the weight of the envelope, the way the driver avoided my eyes like he knew what it contained. I signed my name carefully, legibly. The last thing I would ever sign for that house. Inside, the words were blunt. No euphemisms, no softening language. Dates, deadlines, outcomes. I read it once, then again. And then I sat very still. This was the moment I'd been warned about my whole life. The catastrophic consequence. The thing I was supposed to prevent at all costs. And yet, sitting there in my quiet apartment, I didn't feel fear. I felt finished. I imagined my parents discovering it. The confusion first. The disbelief. The scramble to understand what had gone wrong in a system they believed ran on autopilot. I imagined my mother rifling through drawers, my father rereading statements, both of them circling the same question without daring to ask it out loud. Why didn't Maribel fix this? The phone rang that evening. I watched it light up on the table, vibrating softly. My father's name glowed on the screen. I didn't answer. It rang again. And again. When I finally picked up, his voice was tight. Strained by panic he hadn't learned how to hide. "There's something wrong," he said. "We got a notice. About the house." I said nothing. "Did you—" He stopped. Restarted. "Did you know about this?" I took a breath. Not to steady myself. To give him space to hear what came next. "I stopped paying," I said. Silence crashed into the line. "You— what?" His voice cracked, disbelief clawing at every syllable. "I stopped," I repeated. Calm, even. "After the meeting." My mother's voice rose in the background, sharp with fear. "What meeting?" My father's breath came fast now. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" he demanded. "Why wouldn't you say something?" I looked at the notice on the counter. At the dates. At the end of 12 years written in ink. "You never asked," I said. He started to speak again. Something frantic. Something pleading. I hung up. The line went dead. And for the first time in my adult life, the house stopped owning me. The phone rang again less than a minute after I hung up. I let it ring. Then again. Longer, this time. Desperate. My father had never been a man who chased conversations. He believed authority meant being answered the first time. Hearing the phone vibrate itself breathless on the table told me how far outside his control this had gone. When I finally picked up, I didn't say hello. "Maribel," he said, my name breaking in his mouth. "Put your mother on speaker." I didn't. "We don't understand," my mother cut in, her voice sharp with panic. "What do you mean you stopped paying?" I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, at the faint crack near the corner I'd never bothered to fix. 12 years of restraint pressed against my ribs, begging to be released. I let it stay there. "I mean exactly what I said," I replied. I stopped. My father's voice rose. "You can't just do that. That house isn't mine," I said. "Remember?" Silence. "You knew," my mother insisted. "You knew how important this is. Why wouldn't you tell us you were going to stop?" The word "tell" hung between us like a joke. I laughed once, a short, humorless sound. "Tell you what? That I was done paying for something you told me I had no claim to?" "You're twisting things," my father snapped. "This was never about money." That lie landed hard. 12 years, I said. "That's how long I paid your mortgage." My mother gasped. An actual gasp, like the air had been knocked out of her. "That's not possible," she said. "We would have known." "You did know," I replied. "Every month you didn't check. Every time you spent. Every time you told people the house was secure." My father's voice dropped, suddenly quiet. Dangerous. "Why didn't you say something?" There it was. The question he'd called me with. The question he thought ended the conversation in his favor. I sat forward then. Let the anger finally rise, not hot, not wild, but precise. "Because I was never asked," I said. "Not once. Not when I started. Not when it continued. Not when you decided to leave everything to Lucas." "That has nothing to do with this," my mother said quickly. "It has everything to do with this," I replied. "You told me I never needed help. You told me I was fine, so I acted like it." My father began pacing. I could hear it in his breathing. "You're punishing us." "No," I said. "I stopped protecting you." "You could have ruined us," my mother whispered. I closed my eyes, thought about every check, every transfer, every moment I swallowed my worth to keep their world intact. "You already decided I was expendable," I said. "I just accepted it." Lucas's voice appeared then, cutting through the noise. "What the hell is going on?" My father spoke over me. "Your sister stopped paying the mortgage." There was a pause. Then disbelief, sharpened by entitlement. "She did what?" Lucas asked. "Why would you do that?" I pictured him standing in the living room, the house still warm and solid around him, the floor steady beneath his feet. He had no idea how temporary it all was. Because it was never my responsibility, I said. And because you were never supposed to inherit something you didn't carry. Don't be dramatic, he scoffed. This is Mom and Dad's house. Not for long, I replied. My mother started crying then. Loud, uncontrolled. The kind of crying meant to pull someone back into line. Please, she said. Just fix this. We'll talk. We'll figure something out. Something in her tone shifted. Not remorse. Bargaining. I already figured it out, I said. You made your decision. I made mine. My father's voice hardened. If you don't help us now, don't bother calling yourself our daughter. I smiled. He couldn't see it, but I felt it settle into place like a verdict. You already made that clear, I said. What does that mean? He demanded. It means you don't get to disown me after living off me for 12 years. I replied. You don't get to rewrite the past now that it's inconvenient. The line went quiet. Not disconnected. Just stunned. I ended the call myself this time. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I placed the phone face down on the table and stood up. The question, why didn't you tell us, echoed faintly in my mind, stripped of its power. They hadn't needed to be told. They had needed to listen. And now, for the first time, there was nothing left for me to say. The house didn't vanish overnight. It lingered, stubborn and solid like denial. For a few weeks after that last call, nothing happened publicly. No messages, no apologies, no threats. Just a thick, unnatural silence that told me they were scrambling behind closed doors, trying to reverse time with panic and phone calls and favors they assumed still existed. Then the calls started again. Not to me. About me. Extended family reached out first. A cousin I barely spoke to asked if everything was okay with my parents. An aunt left a voicemail that said my name 3 times before asking why I was being so hard on them. No one asked if the story was true. They didn't need to. They just needed someone to blame. I didn't respond. Lucas called once. Late. Probably drunk. His voice carried irritation more than fear. You really screwed us, he said. Us. You mean them, I replied. It's all falling apart, he snapped. The bank, the paperwork. They're freaking out. They should talk to the homeowner, I said. You know what I mean, he said. You could still fix this. That word again. Fix. I already fixed it, I said. For 12 years. He scoffed. You're exaggerating. I hung up. The foreclosure process moved faster than anyone expected. Systems don't care about family dynamics. Deadlines don't bend for guilt. The house slipped from problem to liability with ruthless efficiency. My parents tried to negotiate. Extensions. Appeals. My father left messages that sounded less like demands and more like negotiations with fate. My mother's texts shifted tone, first accusing, then pleading, then oddly nostalgic. Remember Christmas mornings in that house? Remember how happy we were there? I remembered writing checks while they wrapped gifts. The final notice came not to me, but I still knew the date. Some habits don't disappear just because you let go of the burden. I imagine the day unfolding without me. The knock. The paperwork. The stunned quiet afterward. Lucas moved out. Within a week. He didn't tell me where. Probably didn't tell them either. The house stood empty for a while after that. A shell full of echoes and unfinished sentences. I drove past it once. Only once. The lawn was overgrown. The windows dark. The for sale sign planted cleanly in the soil like a marker. I didn't stop. A lawyer called me later. Voice careful, curious. You were listed on several historical payment records, he said. I just need to confirm. Were you acting in any official capacity? No, I replied. I was just paying. There was a pause. A recalibration. I see, he said. Thank you for clarifying. That was it. No drama, no confrontation, just acknowledgement, late and impersonal, but real. My parents never apologized. They never admitted what I'd done. They never said my name in connection with the house out loud. To do that would have meant rewriting their story. And they had always preferred comfort over truth. The last message I received from my father came months later. "I hope you're happy," it read. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Happiness had nothing to do with it. The house was never really theirs. It was something they borrowed. From me, from silence, from assumption. And like everything borrowed without gratitude, it returned to the world the moment the supply stopped. I didn't gain anything tangible from its loss. No inheritance, no apology, no reconciliation, just something far more valuable: freedom, and the quiet certainty that when they said I never needed their help, they were finally telling the truth, just not in the way they thought.